So the 2020 presidential election will come to a close on Tuesday, November 3rd. And as always, there has been much focus on black voters in this U.S. presidential election. And in particular, there has been a lot of talk about whether or not black people should vote for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party as they usually do this time or not. And as a black man myself who has been born in America, lived in America my whole life, I've also grappled with this question myself. And after a lot of thought, I think that, the black community in America should not vote for Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, in this election. Whatever else they do, even though that is what we normally would do and what we have been doing for the last couple decades, and want to tell you all why. There are two major reasons, big reasons, why I don't think that black people should vote for Joe Biden, the Democrats, this election. And to be clear, I'm saying that we definitely shouldn't vote for Joe Biden at the presidential level, and down ballot, I think also we generally should not vote for Democrats either. Perhaps it might make sense in some localities and some local races to do that. So I'm not going to say that no one should vote for Democrats anywhere, but I think in most places, because the things I'm about to say about Joe Biden also apply to these other Democrats, we also shouldn't do that, but definitely should not vote for Joe Biden at the presidential level. And I also want to make it clear that I'm not advocating voting for Donald Trump. I did not vote for Donald Trump myself. I've already voted early, and I don't like him. I think there are other options. You could vote for a third party, vote for an independent, write someone in, or just not vote. So I'm not, advocating voting for Trump either. I think doing that would be less bad than voting for Joe Biden, so you could go ahead and do that if you really want, but I just want to make it clear I'm not a Trump supporter either. Okay, so the first big reason that we should not vote for Joe Biden is that it is not in our short-term interest. And when you look at Joe Biden as a politician and as a person, it becomes immediately clear that that is the case. First off, Joe Biden has a lot of racist rhetoric, both in the past and the present. So for things that he said in the distant past, you can look at his time as a U.S. Senator when he said that he opposed school desegregation through busing because he feared it would, create a racial jungle, quote unquote, that his kids would have to live in, which is a kind of racially questionable statement. Why are you talking about jungles when you're thinking of black people? You think we're apes or something. He's also said that in the past that he thought that the two-party system was good for the Negro, and good for the South, and good for black people in the South, which is also questionable. And another lesser-known statement, maybe in the late 90s, he said that if Haiti, quote-unquote, sunk into the Caribbean or rose up 300 feet, it wouldn't matter towards U.S. interests, basically saying he didn't care about Haiti. And he's made many other comments. If you just look, there's comment after comment that he's made in the distant past. And as for, racist things that he's said just during this election cycle, he said that, obviously in that infamous interview with Charlemagne, the God of the Breakfast Club, that, if you didn't know who to vote for between him and Trump, then you, quote unquote, ain't black, which is pretty dumb thing to say, especially for an old white man. He also said that the black community isn't diverse, while the Hispanic community is, which, is a very stupid thing to say. He's also said that poor kids are just as smart as white kids, which seems to imply that, all poor people are not white, which is not true. He's also said in response to a question about, basically what the government should do to mitigate the effects of slavery on the black community. He went on a long tangent in the end, said that, black kids don't hear enough words in the home because their parents don't speak to them enough, which is completely stupid. And there's just been countless other things. He's constantly putting his foot in his mouth, saying racist things. And, it's interesting because traditionally Democrats are more covert with their racism, but Joe Biden's pretty overt. He always tells you what he really means, what he really thinks. Just to make a relevant comparison, all of this rhetoric just mentioned is at least as bad as Donald Trump's racist rhetoric. Obviously, Donald Trump is infamous for saying racist things, but you put any of the things I just mentioned up against Trump's comments and any other comments that Joe Biden's made up against Trump's comments, and they're what Biden has said is at least as bad. And I would argue some of the worst things he's said are probably worse than things Trump has said. But yeah, it's rhetorically he's really not good. So based off of what comes out of his mouth, it's pretty clear he does not care about the black community. Next and most important reason that voting for Joe Biden is not in black people's short-term interest is that Joe Biden has a very bad record of things he's actually done, policies towards black people. So he's been in public office for 47 years, and in all that time, he's done virtually nothing to help us, and at the same time, has done a lot of harm. Obviously, he authored the 1994 crime bill, but he also authored a bunch of crime bills before that in the 80s and even 70s. So, he's really a crime bill man. We know that obviously led to mass incarceration of black people. He also put in place a lot of laws to keep schools segregated. So that stopped black kids from having access to the resources they needed to, be educated to the extent that it was necessary. And he fought efforts to desegregate schools all the way. And then also, if you look at his time in the Obama administration, which, contrary to popular belief, was not actually good for black people, even though it had a black face on it. It was a bunch of white people under that in virtually every other position, and the way they acted was no better than the way white administrations acted towards us. If you just look at how they dealt with the financial crisis that hurt black homeowners and caused black people to actually lose wealth under the Obama administration. If you look at just things that went on, like police brutality and things of that nature that always go on. And then that's just domestically. If you look at the foreign policy, you look at things like AFRICOM, where they put a bunch of military bases all over Africa, where the majority of black people in this world live, so that they could, violently suppress Africa whenever they need to. They also ordered a lot of drone strikes in Africa. Obviously, that killed a lot of people. And just general U.S. imperialism, both violently, like I just mentioned, but also non-violently through the financial sector, that's always going on. They, had that go on as usual. So all that just tells you that he's no friend of black people. I'd just like to say again, to make a relevant comparison, while Donald Trump certainly has a horrible record with black people, Biden's record is worse than Trump's when it comes to black people, because he was harming us for a much longer time. Again, 47 years in public office, and was doing so on a much broader scale because, while Trump certainly has done harm since he's been in office, he's only been in office for 8 years. Before that, he really didn't have the ability to affect black people on as broad a scale. And the damage he did was more localized in New York and some of the other places he had property, whereas Biden was crafting policy that affected black people all over the U.S. and even all over the world, and it was virtually all negative. Also, when you look at his running mate, Kamala Harris, even though a lot of people think that somehow she'll make up for Biden's deficiencies when it comes to the black community just because she herself is black. That's actually not true when you look at her, because even though Kamala Harris is half black, she is not pro-black. We all know that she was a prosecutor and has a very anti-black record in that job. Jailed a lot of black people unjustly. Fought a lot of efforts to get people who were falsely convicted released and things like that. So she's built her entire political career on the backs of black people. And, she's very unlikely to change because she's not really done much of anything in all her decades in public office to indicate that she's really improved significantly. And, also, she has a white husband, white stepchildren. So it's very unlikely that when she goes home, her family is pushing her to be more pro-black. So, that there's nothing but the mass incarceration ticket. Joe Biden is, the slave master. Kamala Harris is the overseer. That's all it is. So if we elect them in the short term, which is what I'm going to call the next 4 years, it won't be in our interest because at best it'll be just as bad as the Trump administration, and at worse, it could be even worse. So yeah, that's big reason number one why we shouldn't vote for Joe Biden. Now, the second big reason, and in my opinion, the most important big reason that black Americans should not vote for Joe Biden is because it is not in our long-term interest. And that is simply because, even irrespective of all Biden's failures as an individual, Joe Biden is a Democrat. And the Democratic Party leeches off the black community like a parasite. They're that's exactly what they are. They're a parasite. They've been a parasite for the last 50 plus years that they've had our vote on lock. And that's because they pretend like they like us. They pretend like they care about us. But whenever they've been in office, they haven't done anything for us. And when you look at any Democratic administration in that time that has received a significant number of the black vote, which is all of them, you'll see that they have not done anything to fundamentally improve our lives on a systemic level. And in fact, have just furthered our oppression a lot of ways, from things like the crime bill of Clinton in the 90s to the problems I already mentioned with the Obama administrations. Even if you go way back, you could look at some things Jimmy Carter did as far as welfare reform and ways in which that was harmful. That's just nationally. On the international level, you just look at U.S. imperialism towards majority black countries. The U.S. has been bad in all those areas when Democrats were in power. So really, when you look at all that, you see they don't actually care about black people. They just care about black votes because they need our votes in order to win elections. So they just trick us into voting for them so they can stay in power. And they don't do anything for us because they are our oppressors ultimately. They are also white supremacists. So they view our success as inherently against their goals. So they'll only ever use us. So the only way we can break out of this cycle is if we use our leverage against them by not voting for them. And once the Democrats see that we're not afraid to abstain from voting for them, it causes them to lose elections, then they'll be forced to take us seriously and actually do what we want and do what needs to be done to improve our communities, unless they want to commit political suicide. Now, the thing people always say whenever this is said is that, obviously we hate the Democrats, but the Republicans are worse, and we just can't risk voting for Republicans. This election, you're hearing about how bad Trump is and how we just can't afford to play around this election because if we get 4 more years of Trump, black people are gonna get extinct, blah blah blah. And as I've just kind of alluded to before, that's not as true. Democrats are actually just as bad as Republicans. They're different in some ways, but overall, different doesn't mean better. Democrats are just as bad. So, the risk of a Republican presidency is not enough of a reason to vote Democrat because, the Democrats are not actually better than Republicans. The overall amount they harm us is the same. So we just have to realize that and use our leverage against the Democrats so we can manipulate them to our purposes and get what we need done. The two major reasons and all the, I guess, sub points, if you want to say, under them, why the black community should not vote for Joe Biden this election. I know a lot of people have already voted early, but if you haven't, please, just whatever you do, don't vote for Joe Biden. And if you have already voted early, well, go back and ask them if you can change your vote to not Joe Biden, because I think it's really critical that we begin putting pressure on the Democrats. And, obviously voting isn't all we need to do. I'm not saying that, forcing the Democrats to do what we need them to do by itself is going to solve everything, but it is one piece of the puzzle. So I think this is important. All right, thanks, guys. And whatever you do, please say no to Joe. Thanks. Goodbye.